Hello, students, and welcome to the second part of Chapter 2. As we are moving forward here, we have been talking about the plans of union that occurred in our early American history. And our next is the Stamp Act Congress, which occurred in 1765. Nine of the colonies came together to discuss their grievances against Great Britain, mostly because of the Stamp Act, which required everything that was bought and sold to include a royal stamp of approval, and this was the form of a tax. They did not like this tax levied on virtually every item. This increased the price of virtually every item the colonists needed. So these nine colonies came together to redress these grievances. And that leads later to the First Continental Congress. This is where the Founding Fathers wrote a Declaration of Rights and sent it to King George III, affirming that they had the same rights as all Englishmen and that they felt that these rights had been infringed upon by the king. The next year, we have the Second Continental Congress. They choose John Hancock as the president. The commander-in-chief, because we've reached a point of military conflict at this time, is George Washington. Washington was the man chosen for that. And this was our national government for 5 years. This was our national government during the American Revolution, was the Second Continental Congress. And this led to the writing, of course, of the Declaration of Independence. 5 men were appointed to write it. They're listed there. However, most of the work was done by Jefferson. Jefferson was very young at the time. Jefferson was very popular, and he was also from the largest state, Virginia. So it was politically expedient to have Thomas Jefferson as a big player and the major writer of this document. Now, the first state constitutions all had some common themes. Number one, they had popular sovereignty. The first state constitutions gave the power to the people. It had limited government. It said that government had to obey the rules just like everyone else. They weren't all powerful. Government had limits. And the first state constitutions also had bills of rights, which are a guarantee of protections against civil liberties. They had separation of powers. Most of the state constitutions divided their power, their government, into 3 branches, and also had methods for them to check each other, checks and balances. So these things were included in the first state constitutions, even before the writing of our U.S. Constitution. Now, we have in American history what is known as the critical period. Okay, and this is the time that the United States was governed by the document known as the Articles of Confederation. This was our first form of national government, and it was adopted in 1777. And it amounted to little more than a quote-unquote firm league of friendship among the states. Each of the states ultimately held their own sovereignty, meaning there was no higher authority or government above them. They found out that this did not work. The format was this. There was one branch of the government, only the legislative branch, no judicial, no executive. There was one house in this one branch. There was one representative from each state who had one vote, and Congress chose a president among themselves, so it was more of a parliamentary system. They had the following powers that are listed here. If you want to, you can pause and read these. And the states had a few obligations. Number one, they had to provide money and troops. They had to submit their disputes to Congress. They had to surrender fugitives from justice. They had to treat citizens from the other states fairly. And they had to allow open travel and trade. However, with no national government to enforce these things, these were routinely disobeyed and broken. For example, states began to refuse to send money. They began to charge citizens from other states as a result of feuds and so forth. And what occurred was disorder among the early United States. And there were several weaknesses that are listed here. And the articles could only be changed by a unanimous consent of all 13 states, which was very, very difficult to attain. Partly because states in different parts of the country had different interests. So it was very, very hard to get them to agree. So the major weaknesses of the articles are listed here. So that's why this is called the critical period. There was disorder, there was chaos, there was bickering amongst each other. We had states making treaties with other countries that did not serve the interest of other states. States were organizing their own militias, and we were not united. Going back to Benjamin Franklin's quote, we were not hanging together, so to speak, and people all across the 13 United States saw this as a problem. The straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, was Shays' Rebellion, which occurred in the fall of 1786. Daniel Shays led an armed uprising that shut down government offices in Massachusetts. They protested taxes and debts to banks. They even adopted the battle cry of the Revolution, no taxation without representation, not realizing that they indeed were represented. However, it was one representative from their state. But the state forces stepped in and they stopped the rebellion. However, the fact that an armed citizen could gather a mob and shut down a state government was an alarm to everyone across the 13 states that something needed to be done to strengthen our government, to unite us and make us stronger. So therefore, in 1785, we had several steps toward a new government. Once people saw this wasn't working out, Maryland and Virginia met at George Washington's home, Mount Vernon, in order to settle a trade dispute. The next year in September, 5 states met and began discussing starting a new government. 5 states came together and said, hey, this isn't working. Let's talk about what we can do to make this better. And then in Philadelphia, nearly all the states met. Rhode Island was the exception. In May of 1787, with the purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation. However, what happened next was something very different than what they had met for. And we'll talk about that in the 3rd section. Thank you so much for watching.